Hello and welcome back to the Premier Injuries channel. Today we're talking about the big injury news of the weekend, and sadly we saw that Tino Livramento had an ACL injury. So let's start off there, Ben. I mean, what is an ACL injury and what's the kind of return to play data like for that type of injury?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the main stabilizing ligaments of the knee. When you look at the mechanism of injury on Sunday, it's never great. Non-contact injuries in particular, you see that left leg being planted and then almost knee buckle inwards. And then obviously the player and those around him in massive, in major distress. We heard from Ras Hassanhüttl post-match and James Ward-Prowse, both of those players in terms of how they were describing the player, and they were internally, they will already have a fairly good idea from on-field assessments and subsequent tests that would have happened in the change room. They would have knew what had happened. Officially, they won't announce that until maybe they've had confirmation via the scan results and imaging. What we don't know at this point is, yes, there's ACL involvement, but are there any secondary damage to in and around that knee joint? Now, I see a lot of people, major speculation with regards to a return to play. What we don't know at this particular point is, the severity of that problem. Secondary injuries can impact that return to play timeline significantly. So that's something to bear in mind. What I would say with regards to the current data, and we have ACL data that goes back to 2007, and not just in the Premier League, but also international competitions and some also European, that's currently standing at around about a return to play of 290 days. So you can you can write off in this instance, if that's the case, around the remainder of 2022. If you want a little bit further insight into the understanding of the injury, the mechanisms, and the processes of recovery, check out our video with Dr. Matthew Provencher from the Stedman Clinic. What I would say with regards to the data also, everybody, again, assumptions are drawn and conclusions are drawn from the fact that, Livramento is a young player. Players tend to heal a bit quicker, bounce back a little bit quicker. But what the data suggests that those younger players, and I've categorized these in two ways, those from 18 to 21, and then also 20 to 25, they actually take a longer time to return to play than players who tend to be a little bit older. Now, this is where we talk about external influence and factors and other things that come into play around these injuries. So yes, players may heal a little bit quicker. They may progress through that recovery and rehab phase a little bit quicker. But what you need to bear in mind is there's a management issue here, and there's a duty of care on behalf of the clubs. This is not about getting a player back to return to play and then all of a sudden hit the ground running. This is about protecting the longevity of their career and not making sure that they're back for, the middle of next season, whenever that case may be. It's about making sure that Tino Livramento is okay for the season after that, and he goes on to fulfill his very promising, football career.
And just on that question there, because I think you're alluding to it, there is a high risk of re-injury with ACL injuries, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at some research, that would be very indicative, because we've seen those return to play timelines, swing in recent years. Initially, this was potentially career ending or certainly a career threatening injury. And typically, you suffer a rupture, you're looking at maybe 12 to 18 months. As we moved on, as surgical techniques advanced, and improved, those return to play timelines have reduced. And, we do have records of players who've returned to play without surgical intervention in and around that 100 to 110 days mark. In recent times, we've seen players, Roberto Baggio is one that springs to mind. He was in and around that 85 to 90 days. Florian Lejeune at Newcastle, that was 120 days. But to coin a Raj Bra 3CB performance, it's all about risk and reward in this instance. And every month ahead of this 9-month period, players are at significant increased risk of re-injury and or recurrence. And, you know, with these young players, what you don't want to do, you don't want to take any chances, you don't want to take any risks and potentially, you know, put a player out, you know, for any longer than there needs to be. There will be a reconstructive surgery, and, you know, they will be using a tendon to replace that ligament. Now, that there's a period of ligamentization, which means, you know, that tendon will eventually, you know, turn into a ligament and replace the job of that old anterior cruciate ligament. And typically you're looking at 12 to possibly 18 months for that to happen. So, you know, even though a player may return to play, we keep on banging the drum about a return to performance. We're probably, fingers crossed, you know, not going to see Tino Livramento back to maybe those pre-injury levels until maybe 2023 to the 2024 season.
Now, we are going to see Tino Livramento right now. We're going to look at the footage because, again, you said at the start there was a non-contact situation. And I think for a lot of people, they don't understand how can you get injured and such a severe injury from out actually having somebody hit you or come into contact with you. As we can see from the video now, he just places his foot on the ground. It then buckles a little bit, and then he's on the floor screaming in pain, which is really sad to see. But what is the mechanism of injury that has caused this without any sort of contact with an opponent?
Yeah, I mean, just the dynamic nature of the sport. We're talking about, you know, at elite level, particularly in the Premier League, where we know in terms of intensity, it's like no other league in the world. You know, the forces going through the knees and the ankle, that foot's planted, quick change of direction, and then sometimes, like I say, in this instance, unfortunately, you see that knee buckle, and that's where almost you suspect that one of those stabilizing ligaments, in this instance, the ACL, you detect that that's been impaired, or there's a problem there. And also the other concern is maybe there's some kind of meniscal damage as well. Rarely are these injuries done in isolation. So again, you know, we talk about timelines, and some suggesting 8 or 9 months. That's great, but also you may need to address other issues in and around that knee structure before the player can actually return to play.
And I think a final question that people will be interested in, we see him come off the pitch and, you know, the crowd give him a good applause and everything, but you see him with a mask on, giving gas to him. Is that oxygen? A lot of people say it is oxygen. What would be the purpose of that?
Yeah, this is about pain management, and having experienced an anterior cruciate ligament rupture myself, I can say that that features fairly highly on the scale of pain. I got asked a question yesterday about a player in terms of pain for a fractured patella. ACL is streets above that in terms of this latest setback. For another Premier League player, you know, it can be excruciating, and yeah, you'll take everything you can at that point to try and sort of ease the pain.
Well, of course, Ben, that's a fascinating insight into the injury of Tino Livramento, and I'm sure you know you reflect my feelings when I say we wish him a speedy recovery as possible. But if you want to keep up to date with all the injury news in the Premier League, please do press that subscribe button, do leave a like and comment as well if you've got any questions about Tino Livramento's injury or injuries in general. We're always happy to answer your questions and supply you with data. But for now, we're going to wish you the best of health, the best of luck, and we will see you again very soon.